Welcome to Never Rewrite. I'm Isaac Askew.
And I'm Jeffrey Sherman. And today we're going to discuss how company culture impacts the style of code delivery. Isaac, you wanted to discuss this one. Why don't you kick it off? How does company culture impact code delivery?
Yeah, I kind of wanted to have more of an open conversation about it because part of me, I guess the reason I had this question to begin with, or just this thought to begin with, is that I've been working recently with a company and I noticed that there was some kind of rigidity around the release process. There was like the code review process was really bottlenecked.
Hmm.
So that means like every time somebody tried to get code in, there's only a few people who could review that code. They had very little tests in place, like automated tests in place. So it was a lot of manual QA for everything. And so you had this huge backlog. And even once it did pass manual QA, there might be some really strict code review um, part of that was still like what I felt like was maybe overly strict in certain areas.
Hmm.
So, for example, um, you'd have maybe something related to like money movement, which had a lot of eyes on it. That makes a ton of sense to me.
Yeah, you definitely want to keep eyes on money movement
Yeah,
stuff.
and that seems fine. But then the same process was being used in other areas of the application that were very almost not none used. Like one of them was like this square foot calculator, just
Okay.
figure out how much you pay somebody per square foot for something. And one, it was broken. That's why somebody was adding code to fix it, so it never worked. But two, it was just like in way in the side, one other area. And so we were thinking about different processes by which to get some of this stuff kind of unblocked. And I was like, you clearly see as you go through the bugs that some bugs are worth more eyes than others.
Mm-hmm.
And if we're going to claim this kind of environment that we're using for review each time, we if we're just as thorough with the money movement bugs as we are with this calculator that no one was using, uh, then we're going to kind of waste a little bit of time if we already know we have a bottleneck here on the whole review process. So it got me thinking a bit uh, about like you had a lot of people there like kind of already mad about like how the system is. We have to do a complete rewrite of it, and I'm like, oh, there we go.
There's the king.
There's the
So
message.
it sounds like you're saying you had a bottleneck in the part of the book. So there's parts of the process that have different levels of concern, or you have different levels of concern, right? There's different levels of risk, and you're applying one review process on all of them, but that review
Right.
process is highly bottlenecked. And
Yeah.
so, one thing that you said that in the start is it sounded like this process is highly manual because you don't have a lot of tests.
Well, I don't know why it is how it became the way it is currently,
Okay.
but I do know there's like a lack of tests in the area that I would want them. There's this kind of a split system, and the newer system has better test coverage, which we've seen that
Okay.
before too. But the older stuff is there's generally like the cultures don't write tests for it because there's not tests in this area already set up for examples. And if
Mm.
you are going to add stuff here, you may as well just go ahead and port it to the new system instead of trying to write a couple tests to patch the old one. That was kind of like, I guess, the philosophy to begin with. So I kind of pushed back on that. And I thought, we should add tests, but there's a lot I could get into there. But the main reflection was I was just thinking, how did it get this way? And is it getting kind of like positively or negatively reinforced in certain areas to keep doing things the way we're doing it? Um, so in the message how company culture impacts the style of code delivery, I was thinking um, the people I've worked with in the past, I've definitely worked with some people who are very rigid and
Mm-hmm.
academic when it comes to like, or pedantic is the term I'd use for certain types of code review. Like,
Yes.
try basically just rejecting every PR if like one small thing, or somebody named a variable a fine enough name, but it wasn't the name that you would have chosen, and you're pretty strict, and you keep rejecting. Like, and I was thinking, I can imagine over time, people will start having those bigger PRs. They want to pair more with that person in particular, just because that person's picky enough to
Mm.
push back on everything. But they're only
Do
pairing
they?
with that one person.
Mm.
What are you gonna say?
Uh, No, I lost it. So it sounds like
Oh yeah,
you've got a vision here where someone who is pedantic or just has strong opinions can make themselves a bottleneck for releasing software because
yeah,
they become the gate, and
right.
everyone has to go through the gate, and so it, one, slows down your delivery, two, that person that person's style becomes very rigid, right? That everything has to have
Yeah.
and it sounds like it's more than just like, hey, we could, implement a style guide and have a linter just change, refactor all
Oh
the
yeah,
code.
yeah. Which still needs to happen.
Right, because I'm all in favor of having a linter, like agree on a style guide and have the linter change it. And hey, you didn't run this through the linter. It's a perfectly valid argument that can be resolved in like 2 minutes.
Yeah, it's more like I've definitely met a few characters that they either they built the original system and they're really
Mm-hmm.
protective of it, or they started to own the system and they get really protective of it. And by protective, I just mean like they have a certain level of code quality they think you everything should meet. And I
Is
kind
that a
of
high
agree and
level or
disagree
a
with
low
it.
level?
It's very high level, very
Okay,
very high level,
but it doesn't
to
include
the point
tests.
that well, yeah, we'll kick off tests for the second. I'm trying to use one term to
Sure.
be an umbrella for a lot of different people I've met with this kind of characteristic. But their opinions are of every bit of code are so high that not even like no new developers that are more junior that would do it a different way can get theirs reviewed. Like, and no one else can review like this person can too. Like they're just a supreme bottleneck. So you think, okay, well, this person has to train other people to have code reviews just as good as his, or relinquish a bit of control and understand that some code is going to be less perfect, but okay and fine enough for now.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that second one is what you don't see. It's like the idea that there could be a little less attention given to one section that's like a little less priority, but you know, like imagine a one line fix for something like a red to blue button. And someone's
Yeah.
like, this button should be blue. And then someone's like, well, that actually, we're still having this caught up in the design system, and the new design system is coming out soon, and we should wait for the blue that comes from the design system instead of fixing the blue now. Back and forth, things like that. You're like, well, or you could just go ahead and fix it real quick and put it the blue that we have now, and then reapproach it in a second. It takes one moment. Why are we having this conversation? That kind of
Yes.
thing. So,
So an interesting thing there, because I'm remembering I worked with a fellow who was very particular about the code and did have very high standards, but he also made sure to not be the bottleneck. Like if you gave him a PR, he would have that turned around for you within 15 minutes.
hmm,
If it was a long PR, it might take him a while longer. But like if it was a, 10, 15 line thing, he'd have it back to you. And you might not like his comments, but you couldn't complain that that his time to give you the comments was a bottleneck.
right.
That person that person also was, a machine who worked a bajillion hours a day. And so I
Okay.
think what you're saying is you've got this super senior developer who is writing code and also the bottleneck for the reviews and doesn't see that
Yeah.
he has to relinquish either one of these positions, right? Like if he cares so much about the architecture and the structure and the code, he's sort of putting himself out there as, okay, I'm now, the sensei almost. Like I'm no longer going to be competing. I'm no longer going to be doing the work. My job is now to teach you how to do the work. And that
Right.
doesn't sound like where they want to go.
Yeah. So again, this is a few different people in one
Mm.
that I'm thinking of here. So anybody listening, this is not you. This is an
It's a
amalgamation of
conglomeration.
right, right. But yeah, so the idea is like you're right. They won't pick one or the other. Either
Mm-hmm.
either you're the code reviewer and that's your job is to code review and then train others to have your same level of critique and that kind of thing, or you code and relinquish a little bit of control and realize that I can't be the person coding and code reviewing. Otherwise, while I'm coding, I can't be doing the reviewing. And then we end up getting bottlenecked here. But I think not just that kind of personality trait, but I'm also kind of having a deep reflection on like perfect versus imperfect code. You know,
Hmm.
like in my head, I honestly don't care if some code is not reviewed as thoroughly as other code is. I don't care if it doesn't match certain standards as other parts of the code. Like I feel like
See, the person I'm
releasing very. Go ahead.
oh well, the example I'm thinking of, he would care. He would argue against it that the
Yes. Oh,
code,
totally.
all parts of the code should all be up to the standard, and I
Right.
could see that.
I can see that, but also in my experience, when you try to do something like that, to where you end up kind of like crushing someone's whole point of getting into the field to begin with, because you're
Yes.
so strict with how you want things done your way that no one actually gets to write code and express their own creativity. So you're going to have junior developers coming in, and you can't be like completely destroy like their style of writing something. I think you need to let
Oh,
people
can't you?
merge code. Well, you know what I mean. You shouldn't. You can. You certainly
Yes.
can. I believe that you shouldn't. So I've come to this kind of maybe fringe belief, but maybe give you some feedback here. That yeah, there's some code that you can knowingly understand is not perfect, but you can see that someone else is kind of learning in that area and they're growing as a developer while writing that code.
Hmm.
Because I think if you end up going through every time someone says I want to do it this way, I found a creative solution, you're like, no, this is a better solution. You should name the variables the way I would name the variables and do things the way I would do the things. Then like for me, programming is a form of like writing and creative expression.
Hmm.
So not everybody should have the exact same solution or the exact same style. And so I kind of like the idea of getting these just moving quickly and failing
Yeah.
fast rather than having these really tight no commit should pollute my code base ever unless it's the exact perfect code. And I guess that's my main pushback against that type.
Well, it sounds like from the way you're describing it, the person isn't collaborating and isn't a coworker. The person is, I don't even want to say a dictator or an authoritarian, but they're not being they're not being a collaborator and they're not being a colleague. It's more of a
Yeah.
hierarchical system, a feudal system where they're in control and everyone else is the drone, like they're the queen bee, and everyone else is the
Right.
drone who does things to better the hive, and the queen is the hive. And
I always like our analogies we come up with.
yes, these are good analogies. One day we'll come up with a book of all the analogies. And I think that's a very important thing because, like, bugs with queens work fine. Like that's a pretty successful model, but humans aren't particularly suited for that, and you're not going to learn any. Like the drones aren't supposed to learn anything. I think is a big piece of what we're talking about.
Right.
And if that's how you want to write your software, you're going to end up with a very weird, stunted culture. You're going to end up with a culture of a queen and drones, where
Mm-hmm.
the drones are fairly mindless, very basic programmers, and the queen is got to do all of the command and control and everything else, and that's going to lead you to fewer, just less code in general. So things are going to cost more. It's going to take longer to
Right.
release, and you as the business owner is highly at risk if the queen dies. Right, like the bust factor of this is huge. If your queen
Exactly.
quits or like everybody else is stunted, everybody else is used to just giving up, or they quit, right? And that's also very expensive.
Right.
Uh, Replacing people is extremely expensive, especially for developers.
Yeah. I guess there's a few pieces there because like there's the bus factor piece for like one person bottlenecking everything and like knowing the system that well.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, obviously they should train other people too, but I think the main issue as well is at least where the company culture part comes into play here. Well, one, they're shaping it, but two, they're shaped by it. because generally speaking, they're working at a startup that's moving at a fast pace, so they're incentivized. So some people are incentivized to write faster code that or write code faster that ended up actually causing all the issues to begin with that makes
Mm-hmm.
them now want to slow down and do it the right way. And they almost make a zealot out of somebody like that, because now that they've seen all the disaster of the third age of man. Now that the fourth age of man is here, they're going to do it the right way, And they're like, no, I've seen. They're almost like traumatized essentially by what could go wrong because
Yeah.
they've seen those disasters. So you can see the wheel of time spin. Yeah.
Well, I'm
The
just
snake
thinking back
eating
in
its own tail.
my own past,
Hmm.
where I once was hired by a marketing company that they had purchased a company, and they had the queen programmer, and he was the queen, and it was his system, and everybody else had to do it his way, and he was the command and control. And the company, they bought this startup for a few $1,000,000. And like, okay, well, this person, is a huge risk because he's the only one who knows the system, and he can't do it all because like the system had flaws. And part of the reason that the startup got sold was, hey, we've hit like a peak. We can't
Mm.
move forward without a huge infusion of cash or capital. So we're just going to sell to somebody who could use this tool and has the money to make it expand. And so I was one of the people they hired. Like, okay, cool. We bought this tool, this small startup, and we need to, you know, we need to scale it like 15x for our needs,
Okay.
and that'll be great. And I joined, and the queen proceeded to fight me tooth and nail on everything, because he saw me. One, he didn't like the idea that he didn't know everything. Two, he didn't like the idea that I was going to make him more replaceable, right? Because if I also
Fair.
knew everything, then he suddenly could be replaced. Uh, and just a lot of it was I was an ego threat to him. Like, he had told me many times how he was this boy genius, and I'm like, dude, you're 25.
Well,
Right?
he's a
You
boy.
you were a boy, and
Maybe not
you
the
may have
genius.
been a genius, but right, like, okay, you were a genius when you were a kid, but that was a long time ago, and you need to grow the fuck up.
Okay.
Right, just like,
Interesting.
uh, that's fine. Like, you were very smart as a kid, but eventually you grow up, and now you're not a kid
Mhm.
anymore. And he just couldn't internalize the idea that, like, the company was sold. Like, he built this thing for a guy, and the guy sold the company and him with it,
Mhm.
and now he was part of a much larger company, and they didn't worship him,
Mm.
and they didn't respect the fact that he was the coder behind this thing that got built and sold for millions of dollars. It's like, okay, well, I'm like, I hope you got a good payday out of that. Like, I don't know what
Right.
you want from me. Oh, I knew what he wanted from me. He wanted me gone. And as you say, he got his way. He got me gone.
Okay.
Where, I just basically took it to the management. I'm like, look, he's not going to let me in. He's not going to share power or anything else. So you either need to deal with that, or I'm going to move on. And they said, oh, well, we're going to let you move on. And I said, okay, cool. And I got a new job. And that's what will happen to any other company that has a similar bottleneck, is the good
Yeah.
developers. The developers who are going to bring new perspective and new skills aren't going to stand for it. They're going to move on.
So on the flip side of that,
Mm.
and the kind of a fun 180 from
Yes.
the first part of this, uh, is one of the companies I'm working with. They have a really good company culture,
Mm.
and so there was some rigidity that I had initially expected that did not end up becoming the rigidity that was like it didn't actually come into fruition. It was more imagined
So that's
rigidity,
good.
and so because this company they were actually really open to change, really open to feedback, and they basically were like, "Well, these are our strong opinions, loosely held," but I didn't realize they were loosely held at the time, and they were saying, "You give us some good." reasons to do it faster or to basically uh,
Do it
in
different.
certain areas go move a little faster and more risky, and
Mm-hmm.
then we're okay with trying that. Um, so we shifted things a bit. We actually said, okay, what we're going to do is for these, we're going to organize some things into pods. We'll have different people kind of manage certain areas, and some of the other areas that we can go ahead and throw up on testing environments, we'll go ahead and throw up there and test it in our way real quick. And the other ones we'll test in a more thorough fashion. And if we have any issues with QA, well, let's get two other QAs in there. And they were like, okay, well, we know some other people that are really good, like essentially some sales people or other people that were really good at understanding the product, that knew all
Okay.
the features of the products that can help understand how that system should behave. And they found more QAers, and they were really open to this change. And I saw something that would kind of like slow down initially, and I was like, oh man, this is going to be a slug. Just from the fact that people were open and accepting to trying new things,
Hmm.
suddenly switched to a very speedy process. And
Nice.
that's
That's
kind
great.
of, yeah, it was exceptional. And that's kind of what made me think about, man, as I came into this to the system, I was thinking this would be a huge uh, effort, and it would be
Yeah.
a lot of. It would mostly be a coding effort. Then I initially hit a different company culture, and I thought, oh, actually, I think most of this will be a culture issue because I think there's a lot of rigidity here, and people are not going to be open to trying new things or new processes. And it slowed down for a moment, and then once I learned more and met with people, paired with people, and they saw
Mm-hmm.
what we were trying to do, it flipped again back to no, everyone's there. Everyone's willing to accept some changes here, do things differently, try out something new because they know it's not working for them the way they're currently doing it. And it went back to okay, now we're back to just the
Hmm.
code delivery part.
And how
Um,
is that? Has the tempo increased to the? I guess the two metrics to me. I know there's the whole Dora metrics, but the two metrics to me that
mhm.
would stand out would be, that are releases happening more often, and are they smaller in size? Like, are the merge requests getting smaller, and are the releases getting more frequent, or
I
at
would say
least
the
are the
releases.
release not, air outages getting less common?
I would say the outages are less common. I haven't been working with this particular company long enough to have like a good metric for how often it happened before, but I know it's been less frequent, at least recently. As far as how
Mm-hmm.
frequently they release, they seem to release. They seem to release at a decent enough pace. Like I think before it was like maybe weekly. I'm not really sure, but I think they were transitioning to more daily whenever I got there. Um, but I think the main thing is just the review bottleneck. They would have PRs that were open for months and just didn't pass review,
Oh,
and then new customers would complain about bugs, and those bugs actually were already fixed with the PR from months ago that couldn't make it through review. And so there was this big effort to go through, finally figure out what's. Hey guys, everybody, just I'm going to grab somebody. Let's review this ticket together. The one who's complaining a lot, the most about
mm-hmm.
this thing. Let's get it in. Go through, tag all the duplicate bug reports as the same one. Kind of just organize everything.
Yeah.
And there was a huge effort to do it. Let's get all these open pull requests closed. Let's get everything in review. If it's stuck in bottleneck for QA, let's find other QAers. Let's just all get together. And it was like a really healthy rallying to do this. And I think they went from like 270 bugs to like 180 just from marking duplicates and closing bugs. It went from like 60 open pull requests to like 19.
That's a
They were
big
just
number.
closing things out. And then the team is happy with it. So it was just, it really, I've worked on teams that were like really strict, not at this particular company, but like in different jobs that I worked at. I've worked on teams within those jobs, some of them that were like really bottlenecked and really rigid and not willing to change. And I've worked on ones that were really risky and willing to merge anything without review. And then ones, everything in between. Um, and I feel almost in an interesting way, at least in my experience, the teams that are less experienced but can work together more collaboratively, even if they're
Mm-hmm.
riskier and move faster, they end up performing better and writing better code in the end because there's no feedback like customer feedback, and you can spend a lot of time planning something to do the pedantic right way for it not to be the actual solution, rather than just getting something delivered fast, even if it's not perfect. Right.
Yeah, the iteration is key, in getting
Mm-hmm.
things in front of your customers.
I would rather get something and deliver something to a customer that was a half measure than take forever and get it something bottlenecked that's like it has to be perfect. Because I think again, a customer feedback will give you key feedback in between those release cycles. Like, oh, cool. I'm glad that part of it's there. Oh, by the way, could you do this while you're at it? And you're like, oh, I'm glad you said that because we were already on this whole route that would have made that more difficult to deliver. Just getting some
Yeah,
small pieces out is like super key. And I feel like teams that can move fast, even if they write imperfect code, it's okay. You end up building something that's useful. And a lot of the perfect code, like we've discussed before, just doesn't make it to production.
well, yeah, it doesn't matter if you have perfect code that doesn't solve the problem, then it's not very useful. And if you
Or if you
have
just take too long to
imperfect
deliver it.
code,
Yeah.
but if you've got imperfect code, but it's written in a way that makes it easy to change, you can go back and fix it or improve it when you know that it's actually worthwhile to do so.
Right.
And so
So
don't,
yeah.
dear listener, please realize that when we say imperfect code, we mean maybe it's inefficient and maybe it doesn't have all the error handling, but it has tests and it's designed for refactoring, and it's lots of little things and not giant balls of mud.
And also, listener, um, if you're looking for a new job one day and you're applying and you're talking to a company and you I think these are the questions I would probably ask now. Like, what does your code delivery style look like? Do you have like kind of a rock stars on your team, or do you have a lot more pairing? If you hear that there's a couple of key programmers and there's not a pairing culture, that might be a telltale sign that there's like some control issues on what goes in.
Mm-hmm.
And that might really impact your job and how you can do it. If you don't want to get Jeffreyed from a kid genius, where you try something and you're like, okay, I can't make any progress here. This sucks. I'm switching jobs again.
Yeah, it is to be on the other side of that where
Mm-hmm.
you are getting shut down, and for the reasons that don't make any sense, or at least don't make sense in terms of actually benefiting the company or the customer. It's extremely frustrating.
All right.
All
Any
right.
other wrapping thoughts?
Nope. I'm Jeffrey Sherman.
And I'm Isaac Askew, and this is Never Rewrite.